because of the sudden and intense speculations that Jim Jones may be blacklisted. Things in the hip-hop industry have gotten really nasty, and many claim that 50 Cent was the one who subtly brought it about. Listen, we're not claiming that it's 100% true, but the energy on the streets is telling the truth. People are waking up to rumors that Jim is no longer receiving the same calls, failing to appear on the same stages. While 50 Cent is out here moving very quietly and strategically, it left out some lineups. You see, isn't your typical rap feud? No, rumors have it that things changed behind the scenes. According to several insiders, Jim Jones was frozen out by people he believed to be reliable. Appointments were canceled and collaborations were retracted. All of this can be traced down to one individual, Curtis 50, Frank Jackson. However, why now? What truly motivated 50 to make this quiet move after all these years of conflict and covert jabs? Let's just say that things are looking ominous for Jim at the moment, as fans have been piecing it together, locating old interviews, and determining who unfollowed whom. So fasten your seatbelts because we are going to dissect everything. Thus, it all began when people saw that Jim Jones was moving in an unusual way. The Jim that had been everywhere all of a sudden stopped turning up. No more live performances, no more sporadic podcast appearances. Fans initially believed he would be taking a little time off to focus on his family or something similar. However, significant undertakings associated with his name began to subtly vanish. The true speculating started at that point. N was blacklisted by Jim Jones, particularly. When Jim's name disappeared off the invitation list of a major hip-hop event in New York, people began to side-eye him. Jim Jones always had a place at this kind of event, no matter what. But nothing this time. No mention. Fans embraced the notion that perhaps someone had pulled some strings to force Jim out at that point. And memes began to circulate. And 50 Cent was the first name that came to everyone's attention. Because to be honest, 50 and Jim have always been at odds. That rivalry dates back many years, but felt different. Was more than simply old-fashioned diss recordings or social media posts. It appeared controlled, strategic, and silent. People were compelled to make the connections. Shared a screen grab of an old federal transcript. Nothing except vibes, no caption. It was associated with a notorious person. Jim Jones was purportedly mentioned in court during the Tekashi 69 trial, although his name was not given. Now, officially, nothing was ever proven. Jim was not prosecuted. No voice was verified. But there have always been rumors in the hip-hop community. Fans therefore interpreted 50's posting of that file as more than simple trolling. This is 50 putting the final stamp on, they claimed. Jim, it got stranger after that. Labels were abruptly discontinuing collaborations, according to insiders. Songs by Jim Jones were being taken off of popular playlists. It appeared that even smaller promoters were reluctant to book him. A label official was even questioned about Jim's future album, according to one source. People began to take it seriously once they simply said, "Ask 50. The Spotify figures then entered the picture. Streams typically increase when there is turmoil surrounding an artist. The element of curiosity. For Jim, however, the situation was reversed. Streams began to fall. Songs vanished from his regular podcast interviews and carefully prepared playlists. It's all going too neatly and too silently. It wasn't arbitrary. Supporters began investigating the precise source of this tension. The moment that went viral was when Jim Jones brazenly asserted that he was more influential and relevant than Nas while sitting down with Shannon Sharpe. The energy around him changed as soon as he stated it. The majority believed Jim was merely using hot language to attract attention. However, it seems that 50 Cent did not interpret it as merely a soundbite from a podcast. And that's how 50 works. If you truly understand his plan, he doesn't always make blatant fun of people. only makes phone calls sometimes. He is renowned for throwing his competitors into quiet time, just like he is for releasing series like Power and BMF. That struck a different chord as Jim began to fade from large lineups, including Summer Jam. Dipset had traditionally dominated Summer Jam. They were always a part of the entertainment, even if Dipset wasn't as hot as it once was. However, nothing this year. Jim gave a strange response when fans questioned him about it. He dismissed it with a laugh and claimed to be concentrating on tasks. However, others close to Jim said he was frustrated, calls as though they didn't want to work with him. A few people in the sector freely acknowledged that it was political. And 50 Cent is the only guy with the authority to impose that kind of silent blacklist. Not only for the music, but also for the business relationships. The man has ties to sports, fashion, alcohol, and television. With 50 quietly pulling strings behind the scenes is more than just a hypothesis. It is a component of his brand. The fact that 50 vanished on Instagram for a few days around the time Jim's rumors truly took off was one of the most significant hints. He simply disappeared without posting or leaving a comment. Suddenly, 50 returned with a single post. A picture of a modern conference room with documents on the table and the word checkmate as the only caption. Just that, no names, no tags. Fans understood his meaning perfectly. Online users quickly began conjecturing that 50 had recently inked a contract that would formally close. Jim, everyone sensed something big happening: radio events, streaming, but no one knew what it was. As well as Jim Jones, after that post, his energy clearly changed. Prior to that, he would take shots back, post memes, and clap back on Instagram stories. However, Jim too became silent following 50's checkmate post. He began sharing exercise, montages, encouraging statements, and gym videos as if he was attempting to change the narrative for the better. But his supporters weren't buying it. The desperation behind it was palpable. Something changed when someone stopped talking about podcasts and instead showed Jim selfies. The moment supporters began recording who unfollowed Jim on social media was what truly triggered it. Well-known rappers, people in the business, and even some of his former partners. It wasn't arbitrary. Jim Jones is currently under what is known as a soft ban in some music circles, which means you won't hear his name on the radio, according to a few unnamed sources. He wouldn't be present at the major industry gatherings. Nobody would discuss it in public. There would be silence. Again, who has a poll like that? One name kept appearing. It was no longer a direct beef. 50 Cent. This takedown was at the business level. Supporters began playing old videos of Jim boasting that no one could ever halt his grind. However, the arrogance was no longer matched by reality. In a tweet, one fan captured it perfectly. Jim believed that his podcast moment was just getting started, but 50 transformed it into a career moment. Upon closer inspection, all the indications, missing reservations, vanishing features, and sporadic radio silence pointed to the same silent source. Perhaps Jim's remark was the last push 50 needed, but others continued asking, was this something 50 had been preparing for a minute? Or was it truly just about the NAS comment? However, fans realized one thing regardless of the cause. Jim had to cope with more than simply criticism on social media. No longer. He had a larger problem to cope with. Real-world repercussions, a silent eraser in addition to beef. Someone who doesn't even need to announce his name, does it? Someone who has years of experience playing this game at a higher level. And some sources say that this could be the beginning. Things around Jim Jones didn't simply calm down after 50 Cent's quiet checkmate post. They froze. Even his staunchest followers began to suspect that something was truly wrong this time. Rappers typically release a freestyle or a trash track to show that they are still relevant when they are under pressure. Jim wasn't releasing any songs though. he had stopped doing interviews altogether. People began to notice that even some of the smaller blogs that had previously written about Jim had stopped doing so. Nothing. No retro videos, no fresh releases. After dominating podcasts and trending every other weekend, Minute Jim vanished from the scene. Supporters began to claim that was more than simply a social media feud. This seemed to be a real industry. Go cold. The moment a fan shared a screenshot of Jim Jones's artist page on a major streaming service, it truly hit home. They weren't lying when they asked, "Where's all his features at?" In the caption, suddenly several of the songs on which Jim had sung were no longer included on playlists. Songs are typically not deleted in this manner unless there is a significant event occurring behind the scenes. Behind the scenes. People were now bringing up a comment made by 50 Cent in a Breakfast Club interview from years ago. He was discussing the characteristics of true power. Being able to move things along without speaking, without shouting or arguing. That comment began to be circulated everywhere once Jim vanished from playlists. The way Jim himself was responding or not made it all even more bizarre. Jim changed his tone entirely, refusing to retaliate or make a disparaging remark as was expected. The entire Instagram feed became filled with motivational sayings, workout videos, and sneaker photos. There was no explicit reference to the rumors, 50 Cent or Nas, since Jim Jones has long been regarded as one of the loudest voices in hip-hop. Particularly when someone tries to play him in public, some fans began to get somewhat dubious at that point. Therefore, this degree of quiet didn't seem like a plan, thought he had been coerced into it. However, neither the playlists nor the social media content was the most bizarre aspect. Fans became aware that Jim was no longer attending ROC Nation gatherings. Now, until you remember, that might not seem like a huge problem. In 2017, Jim Jones formally became a member of ROC Nation. That was significant at the time since Jim and Jay-Z had been at odds for more than 10 years. He suddenly turned around and signed with him after that. Fans so anticipated that Jim would still be a segment of that circle. However, Jim was absent from the ROC Nation brunch in early 2025. Furthermore, neither his name nor his pictures appeared in the journalistic reportage. Fans began to piece things together at that point. Because if there's one thing about Jay-Z, it's that he no longer participates in small-scale rap feuds. However, business moves quietly. That's not the same. Now, they wanted to know if 50 Cent had made a call that went all the way to ROC Nation. Fans weren't the only ones making guesses. Something was posted by a little music blogger that caused quite a stir. They stated they'd spoken to someone inside one of the large streaming firms. They claimed that due to a silent industry freeze imposed by powerful individuals, Jim's music was no longer promoted. Everyone had the same name in mind, but they didn't specify who. 50 more insiders began to comment after that post. Look, man. If 50 don't like you, there are certain spaces you just aren't going to get invited to, said a podcast host in a clip. Again, no one specifically mentioned names, but they didn't have to. Fans were aware previously. This is when things became even more bizarre. 50 Cent was launching a new series related to his TV business at the same time as all of this. Half based on fact, half fiction. One of those gritty, street-level shows. And you know what plot point appeared in one of the teasers? After saying the wrong thing on a podcast, a character named Capo is abruptly blackballed in the music industry. Jim Jones has been going by the moniker Capo for years. Additionally, an actor dressed in Dipset-style shackles and equipment played the Capo role in the show. When fans saw that, they went crazy. Individuals were posting clips in tandem and stating this is 50's real revenge. It wasn't about diss tracks anymore. This was storytelling payback. 50 had taken his beef with Jim and turned it into content. Real life and TV blending into one long movie. Even people outside the hip-hop world were noticing. One Hollywood Reporter article ran with the headline, "When TV Beef Gets Too Real." Jim's name was now being removed from pop culture discussions, in addition to the music industry's freeze. And it didn't stop there. Funk Flex was one of the most obvious indicators that things had changed. Funk Master Flex had a reputation for riding with Dipset Heavy for years. Even when no one else was playing their records, he would still drop a bomb on them late at night. However, now, Flex wasn't spinning Jim Jones at all, and when asked about it live, he simply grinned and responded, "It's politics, baby." It was a single sentence that spoke it all. There was no need for a lengthy explanation. It's politics. And if you know anything about the relationship between Flex and 50 Cent, you know that sentence carried a lot of weight. Now fans were watching? This unfolds like a full-length movie with Jim, the street king who had started a podcast, going silent. 50 moving like a chess master, pulling invisible strings. And the most bizarre part, Nas, the person Jim had initially slammed, remaining silent the entire time. Fans were calling it poetic, saying that Jim had tried to make fun of Nas for being irrelevant. And now it was Jim who was unable to have his name spoken without causing controversy. But one thing had people wondering if Jim would try to defend himself. He began posting mysterious pictures of himself in the gym with captions like, "Real ones don't fold. We simply move differently." He was lifting weights in another post that read, "It isn't over till I say it's over." Rumors then began to circulate that Jim was working on an independent comeback effort. Numbered label, direct to fans, old school mixtape style, without ROC Nation or streaming arrangements. However, it was unclear whether that would even be viable in the current industry environment. This feels bigger than rap, and honestly, fans weren't wrong. It wasn't just two artists throwing shots. It was legacy versus legacy, quiet power moves, the kind of game where even if you drop a diss track, it doesn't change what's already been set in motion. In 2025, it's not just about dropping music anymore. It's about who controls the platforms. And with 50 Cent moving behind the scenes like that, people weren't sure if Jim could ever really bounce back. But as Jim Jones continued to post those mysterious gym videos, silently lifting weights, and talking about real ones not folding, industry insiders couldn't help but notice something else shifting in the background. It wasn't just the silence. Certain blogs that used to hype Jim up were now posting about him in a completely different way. One blog that always showed him love abruptly ran a headline that read, "Has Jim Jones finally burned all his bridges?" Just plain calling it what it is, without fancy titles or deference in the wording. It seems that fans were saying things like he talked too much in the comments. Look now. And that's when things really started to go awry. One evening in April 2025, fans noticed that Jim's verified Instagram account had been temporarily deactivated. There was no notice or explanation, and it was gone for a few hours before it returned online. People began to speculate wildly about whether it was a glitch, whether he had been hacked, or whether there was someone manipulating that department altogether. Because, let's face it, nothing seems random anymore when you have people like 50 Cent moving quietly behind the scenes. But that wasn't the wildest part. Around the same time, a video clip went viral that wasn't brand new footage of Jim or 50. Rather, it was a behind-the-scenes video from 2017, right after Jim had signed with ROC Nation. Jim was shown sitting in a boardroom looking extremely hyped, flashing bottles and wearing Dipset chains. But what really got people talking was Jay-Z's face in the background, not smiling. In 2025, the old clip began to circulate again, with a completely different connotation, and people were shouting, "Yo, look at Jay." Jay was staring down at his phone, seemingly oblivious to Jim's presence. First of all, he didn't want Jim there. The following event pushed the entire discussion into a new realm. One of the largest radio broadcasters in New York dropped a blind item on air. That hypothesis gained so much traction that even prominent hip-hop pages began sharing it. He stated, "There is a rumor that a certain rapper was recently hit with a silent contract freeze." Without specifically naming any names, he is not being picked up by any label, and he is not permitted to make any significant announcements. Fans quickly realized it was about Jim Jones, and the comment section erupted once more. 50 truly blacklisted him, saying, "Bro, you messed. With the wrong people, your career is over." All of this was taking place as 50 Cent pretended it didn't exist, ignoring Jim on page. When he posted a picture of a chessboard with only 2 pieces left, a black king and a white pawn, fans noticed right away that Jim is the pawn. The symbolism was no longer subtle. It felt like 50 had planned this entire thing from day one. That's what really got people thinking. Was this just 50 being petty? He was posting memes about the power universe, vacation photos, and flexing like usual. But if you really paid attention, there were little hints. Or had this all been part of a larger plan from the start, since even industry insiders were now publicly acknowledging that Jim's situation wasn't good? One executive from a smaller label posted a direct message that read, "Straight up, nobody's touching Jim right now. Not good for business." Many fans found that to be confirmation, but some were not convinced that it was just about rap politics. They believed that something more profound was at play, particularly after that individual's stuff began to resurface. Blogs uncovered those old federal wiretap mentions, linking Jim Jones to the entire 6ix9ine in case from years ago. Again, Jim was never charged or arrested for it, but perception is everything in hip-hop. And now in 2025, as 50 subtly reminded everyone about those rumors, Jim M's reputation was suffering. It was no longer just about music, but also about credibility. One tweet perfectly captured it. Jim talked too loudly for 2 long minutes, and then the room fell silent. However, in the midst of all of this, there was one moment that truly made people pause and wonder if Jim was going to lash out. Without any cameras or an entourage, the fan managed to take a blurry photo of Jim Jones entering a studio building in Miami with his head down and his hoodie up. The message said, "Jim isn't done yet." Nobody knew for sure, but the way things were going, people weren't holding their breath, because at the same time, there was another detail circulating that made the situation feel even more final. And once more, the internet began to buzz with rumors. Was he working on a comeback tape? Was he about to drop some underground heat? Was there a label involved? Or was it just a regular session? Even devoted Dipset fans began to realize how serious things really were when a hip-hop media page posted a list of the summer 2025 festival lineups, including Rolling Loud, Made in America, and Hot 97 Summer Jam. Well, guess whose name was missing? From all of them, Jim Jones. Not even as a surprise guest, not even in the small font. He was completely gone. In the past, even if Jim wasn't the headliner, he would always appear at least once during festival season. Now, nothing. Not even a cameo slot. Jim has yet to issue a statement, and there has been no press release. Instead, there have been more Jim videos and quiet captions, including one that read, "The game don't love nobody, keep moving." Well, some fans took it as a victory, others saw it as a setback. Regardless, it seemed like 50 Cent had truly pulled the ultimate power move, not through interviews or bars, but through complete industry silence. Jim continued to post those silent, cryptic Jim videos, saying things like, "We still outside. K and real ones don't fold," but the stillness was loud enough to disturb the entire community. The truth was becoming harder and harder to ignore. Behind the scenes, people in the music industry were confirming things off the record. And not just random bloggers or fans, but actual industry veterans. One New York DJ who'd spun Dipset Records for years spoke anonymously to a hip-hop news page, saying straight up, "Look, man, ain't nobody booking Jim Jones right now. You do not want to tread on anyone's toes." Some individuals called. Fans couldn't help but notice how it aligned with what was already happening publicly, even though the reporter didn't name names. Flyers for the festival season came and went. Jim's name was still missing. Album announcements were dropped, and there were no Jim features anywhere. Even people Jim used to get along with, like other New York rappers, suddenly became very quiet when his name was mentioned in interviews. People asked Fat Joe about it, but Joe kept saying he had nothing to say. There was no official statement. But fans noticed that for a few hours, Jim's artist page was glitching, no profile picture, missing playlists, and some songs not showing up. This silence spoke louder than any diss track ever could, but it got even deeper. Around the end of May 2025, rumor began to circulate online that really caught everyone off guard. Someone said that Jim's Spotify profile had been temporarily restricted. Spotify didn't respond. People were saying, yo, this isn't a coincidence. But by the time everything returned, the rumor had already gained momentum. Real Blacklist energy is what this is. Whether it was true or just bad timing, it only added to the legend of what 50 Cent supposedly did. Because by now, fans were looking at the whole thing like a chess game that 50 had been playing for years. One old clip even resurfaced from back in the G-Unit days, with him saying on camera, "I never beef for no reason." Strategy is always involved. And some juxtapose that with Jim's recent turmoil as if it were a prophecy. However, Jim Jones wasn't entirely hidden. Around the beginning of June, he had a low-key interview without appearing on a major podcast. He didn't mention 50's name directly, but he said one thing that really stood out. "It's always been me. Against the machine, I've never had any big homie looking out. If it's quiet right now, it's just another chapter." Fans quickly picked up on the wording. It was on a smaller YouTube channel, just him and one young host. There was no fancy set, no big energy, just Jim sitting back in a hoodie, looking but still defiant. Jim said, "If they want to block me, that's cool." Machine seemed like he was referring to the music industry in general, but many people assumed he meant 50 since in the context of New York hip-hop, who else could move like that? He essentially admitted that he might actually be blacklisted when he said, "My hustle has never been one lane." But he was going to find other methods to eat. Rather than fight it, fans then began to speculate about what might happen next. Was Jim going to make the complete switch back to real estate and fashion? 'Cause things weren't looking good in terms of music? One unexpected piece of the puzzle dropped just when folks believed things couldn't get any weirder. During a live webcast on June 10th, a prominent podcast host who is linked to ROC Nation casually stated that Jim's 2024 Summer Jam performance wasn't really meant to go that way. There had been backstage drama, he said. Anything about Jim pulling strings and making it happen, even if he was abruptly removed from the set list. Funk Flex reportedly ended his set early for that reason. It was because Jim wasn't truly cleared to play, not because of the crowd or the enthusiasm. Was that right now? No one is certain. Hey, but it followed the pattern once more. There are additional rumors and silent actions taking place behind closed doors. One thing became more evident than ever while all have transpired. 50 had stopped moving like a rapper. He wasn't insulting anyone. He wasn't going to talk wild in interviews. He moved like a tycoon. Power without sound. Silence on purpose. And you don't even have to speak once you reach that point. Your absence speaks for itself. Because, despite everything, 50 never again mentioned Jim's name directly after sharing that single meme. Not once. And that's precisely why it seems so authentic. Because he'll continue to trot you when he's doing it for fun. However, you can tell it's serious business when he stops talking. It was even being hinted at by those close to Gunnet. If the boss says chess, not checkers, you can be sure he means it. There's no context, but fans knew what it was about, one unit affiliate wrote on Twitter. And without Jim, the music business continued to advance as June went on. More summer events are taking place, and more New York artists are releasing projects. Jim didn't appear on any flyers. Not one. Even his staunchest followers were forced to acknowledge it at that point. Indeed, it appeared that he might actually be placed on a blacklist. The decision to close the door was made by a sufficient number of influential individuals, not because of official documentation. The wildest portion, perhaps. Jim kind of anticipated it. Looking back to his previous interviews, he had stated, like this in the past, discussing how he was constantly an outsider in the field, was not treated with the same dignity as other legendary figures from New York. It wasn't simply talk anymore, though. In real time, it was taking place. It's the most absurd aspect of it all. Nas remained silent. Shannon Sharpe is back and forth. As Sogum is disparaging him, 50 people shared that meme. Nas said nothing at all. Just moves, not a single post or interview. Silent power. 50 was now displaying the same type of silence. And you can tell when someone is winning by doing that. Who shouts the loudest isn't the point. It's about who can change the entire culture without saying a word. And that's just what 50 and Nas did in 2025. Jim continued to share fitness videos in an attempt to demonstrate his commitment to the game. However, the game has already advanced, as supporters have stated in the comments. Now that everything is out in the open, the true question is, has Jim Jones been officially banned? Did 50 Cent indeed terminate his career in a modest manner? Or is this really an additional chapter in the lengthy history of ups and downs in hip-hop? Fans are divided everywhere. Some claim Jim caused it by acting recklessly, talking wildly about Nas, and changing sides too frequently. Some claim that is simply the way the business operates. You can be hot one minute and out of style the next. In any case, there is a lot of stillness at the moment. Quite interviews and mysterious Jim videos instead of formal declarations. Spectacular comebacks, or Jim Jones's songs that shook the streets. And that's what's so crazy about this whole thing. Music isn't the only thing anymore. Power, legacy, and knowing when to play the game the smart way are all important factors. In actuality, the industry feels as though it has already locked the door, even though Jim may still be outside. However, what are your thoughts? Is Jim Jones really done? Or does he still have the ability to make a comeback? Now leave your ideas in the comments. Let's start that discussion. Remember to hit like on this video. To ensure you don't miss the next update, click the subscribe button and press the notification bell. Here we'll be keeping a watch on every action, whether it be loud or quiet. It's quiet. I'll see you at the following one.